we can unanimously agree that there's a lot of bad stuff going on, no matter how you slice it. And that's just how it's always been. There have never been good old days, just days where you were ignorant of the heinous things happening everywhere. And the older you get and the more accessible technology becomes, the more you realize that nobody has any idea what they're doing on every level of society. One thing you can be thankful for when it comes to living in the time that you do is that a lot of punishments relating to mob justice has transitioned to the digital realm. Now, I'm not saying that's better by any means, but at least you're able to turn your device off and walk away. Whereas in previous eras, you didn't have social media to post your thoughts while hiding behind a screen. You had to actually be out there, wide open about it, which meant that others in your vicinity could physically cancel you by means of pain and humiliation. In the 1770s, there was a British loyalist living in the colonies of North America during a time where his opinions and actions became so unpopular that he was merited the prestigious distinction of being tarred and feathered twice. Howdy, this is Dave, and in this video, we will go over the tarring and feathering of John Malcom. John Malcom, born in Boston 1723, was loyal to British authority. So loyal that he traveled to the province of North Carolina to assist with smashing an insurrection, an uprising where armed citizens took action against officials they viewed as corrupt, broke out in that area, known as the War of the Regulation. This conflict is considered to be the beginning phases of the American Revolutionary War. Malcom found a position working as a customs official, and he was very enthusiastic about his job, which made him look like a total wanker, taking his job seriously and remaining steadfast through the Tea Act, which added taxes and was hated. Malcom was vastly disliked. There was a certain type of punishment that was brought over into the Americas, and in the mid-18th century, it gained traction as a means of protest: tarring and feathering. The victim would be stripped to the waist, or completely naked. While wood tar was brought to a boil over a fire, the struggling victim would be held still as their attacker took a brush and painted the hot substance on them. Or even worse, lifting the bucket over their head and pour the burning contents over them, causing substantial burns. Feathers were then thrown on the victim, or the victim was rolled around in them. The aftermath of the incident left them in agony and degradation. Just by looking at them, anyone would know that person did something bad. They would then have to go through the process of removing the tar once it cooled and hardened, tearing away layers of skin from the victim's head and body, leaving them scarred.
Salesman automatically gets tarred and feathered, rode out to the city limits on a rail. Think that's funny? Well, wait till it happens to you. The hair never grows back.
Even though the practice wasn't new, being used on unruly sailors out at sea, it certainly wasn't legal. It was simply an act inflicted under vigilante justice. In 1767, the Sons of Liberty began using tar and feather to punish and humiliate government officials. The practice made its way to Salem, Massachusetts in 1768, leaving low-level customs officials tarred and feathered. Similar acts continued to happen up through 1774. In November of 1773, Malcom was acting as the customs commissioner in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. One particular instance, he seized a ship called the Brothers for not having the proper registration paperwork, and he did so with great enthusiasm. It's said that once Malcom stepped aboard the ship, he began throwing his weight around, acting like a real dick. He heartily damned the sailors, menaced the mate, threatened to sheath his sword in the bowels of anyone who dared dispute his authority. Sailors were obviously upset by this and had another idea for the tosser. They grabbed and disarmed him, removing his sword and cane, and then removed his hat and wig. They held him and poured the hot tar over him, followed by the feathers. It's said that he got off easy because they did not remove his clothes first, so he had a layer of protection covering the majority of his body. It's not like it matters anyway. Just a drop of that stuff on your skin can ruin your day. Having it dumped on you and then soaking into the cloth that you're wearing, in any capacity, would be an atrocious experience, no matter how you look at it. John Malcom recovered from the event and began attending to his duties once again. He faced a lot of harassment and abuse afterwards, being hooted at by people as he walked down the street, especially from Boston patriots who were revolutionaries against British rule. Malcom complained to the Massachusetts governor multiple times about being hooted at in the streets for having been tarred and feathered. The governor basically told him not to react to the provocations, and that was it. On the afternoon of January 25th, 1774, a man named George Robert Twelves Hughes was walking down 4th Street in Boston when he came upon an altercation between John Malcom and a young boy. Malcom was livid and towered over the child with his cane. Hughes, a 31-year-old who partook in the Boston Tea Party a little over a month prior, decided to intervene. When he did so, Malcom began yelling at him, telling him to mind his own business. Hughes continued to call Malcom out for his rough handling of the boy, and a furious exchange of words ensued. At last, when the confrontation reached its boiling point, Malcom called Hughes a liar. And Hughes fired back with, "Be that as it will. I never was tarred and feathered anyhow." Upon hearing those words, John Malcom saw red, and his reaction was to raise his cane and bash George Hughes in the head with it. George fell, unconscious, laying on the ground, blood covering his face from the gash in his forehead. The scene attracted attention, and Malcom was forced to grab for a weapon to hold back the crowd that had formed. He went full Grand Theft Auto and made a mad dash for his house, threatening and taunting the crowd. He even yelled out, "You say I was tarred and feathered and that it was not done in a proper manner. Damn you, let me see the man that dare do it better." You're probably already aware, but that was not a good idea. Malcom made it to his house, but the crowd followed him and gathered outside. Like an absolute legend, he took his sword and pierced it through a window, stabbing a man. The way he waged war with the crowd was pretty impressive. He carried on with threatening them with pistols, telling them that he could get a 30-pound reward for each person he killed. Eventually, John Malcom was pulled from his house to a cheering crowd. They dragged him on a sled and stopped at King Street, which is also where the Boston Massacre took place. They picked Malcom up and removed his coat and shirt. There were some patriots in the crowd who spoke up, thinking that the vigilante justice could hurt the cause. Hughes had gone for treatment from the attack, but afterwards he rejoined the conflict and also advocated for handing Malcom over to the proper authorities. Proper authorities? The mob began listing off reasons why this was not going to happen, and why going through these channels wouldn't do any good. One of them being what happened on February 22nd, 1770, 11 days before the Boston Massacre. A protest formed in front of a Loyalist shop and began throwing rocks. Customs officer Ebenezer Richardson, who was on the scene, fired a shot into the rabble. The ball of lead found its mark in an 11-year-old boy named Christopher Cedar, wounding his arm and chest. The injuries claimed his life later that evening. It's debated, but Christopher Cedar is considered to be the first casualty of the American Revolutionary War. His death was politicized, and Samuel Adams himself arranged the funeral. Richardson was convicted of the murder, but a couple of months later, he received a royal pardon and was transferred to a new position within the Customs Service, never taking any accountability for what he had done. No, this one won't be getting away with it. Malcom hadn't even killed anyone, but aside from his unsavory behavior, he's assaulted a child and the man who came to defend him. He also stabbed someone through a window. Malcom almost certainly wouldn't face the consequences he deserved. The mob wanted to take care of this right then and there. Exposed to the bitter cold air, the crowd cheered as steaming tar was poured over Malcolm's bare skin, covering him. And of course, feathers were applied as well, after which he was placed on a cart and wheeled throughout different points of the town, being flogged at every stop. Everyone was having a great time, except John Malcom. He was taken to the Liberty Tree, which was a famous elm tree at the time, and demanded him to apologize for being an arsehole, renounce his position within the Customs Service, and curse King George III. He refused to comply with their orders, even after they put a rope around his neck and threatened to hang him. Although, he did give in once they brandished a knife and were about to lop off his ears. The crowd then forced him to drink tea, a lot of tea. My sources didn't specify if it was hot or not, but if it was, then that would be terrible. He was forced to drink tea until he could not stomach any more and vomited. All the while being mocked by onlookers, making sarcastic toasts in the king's honor. It's worth noting that throughout this torture, it is said that Malcom held it together with great fortitude and resolution, giving his tormentors feelings of either disappointment or begrudging respect. After this, he was finally freed. He received more beatings until he was unceremoniously dumped at his own doorstep. The whole ordeal he had endured, lasting around 4 hours in the cold, Hughes referred to him as frostbitten and senseless. The news of this event was read in papers in not just the colonies, but across the ocean as well. His recovery from the second tarring and feathering was a long and arduous journey. The frostbite he received caused an extra layer of unfortunate misery as the tar and feather covered dead flesh, peeled off in strips. Malcom saved these strips and kept them in a box as a memento and to offer proof of his suffering in service to the crown. He had an opportunity to sail to England in May 1774 and began a vicious letter-writing campaign to receive compensation for the hardship he had undergone. He sent letters to the Lords of the Treasury, telling the Lord that he was just trying to do his job in getting the tea landed. He also threw his former customs supervisor, Francis Waldo, under the bus, accusing him of wrongdoings. Waldo never supported Malcom zealously seizing the brothers, and the two never made amends over it. Waldo responded to these claims by completely decimating Malcolm's argument on a point-by-point basis, including a segment stating, Mr. Malcom went to Boston and brought upon himself a second tarring and feathering, which happened sometime after the India Company's tea were destroyed and was occasioned by his beating a boy in the street in such a manner to raise a mob. There were certainly many factors at play when it came to Malcolm's second tarring and feathering, but making sure the tea landed was not one of them. In fact, the tea he was referring to had already been dumped into the Boston harbor a little over a month prior. The reasons were more aligned with his unpopularity due to how aggressive he acted, as well as the incident with the brothers. It also did not help his situation that the man he assaulted with his cane was a member of the Patriots and was one of the reasons the tea did not land recently. After a year of being in England, Malcom was feeling homesick and wanted to return to Boston. He petitioned to the king, stating that he missed his family and job that were in Boston. He ended up finding himself assigned to the Independent Company of Invalids at the Plymouth garrison, where he continued to write letters to try and get more money from the British government. They did give him an additional £60 per year for the fact that he was tarred and feathered, but they knew he had to have been at least a little bit crazy. John Malcom stayed in England for the rest of his life, passing away in 1788 at age 65. He never made the trip back to Boston, and he didn't see his wife or children ever again. And that's all I've got to say about John Malcom. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, Please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, have a good one.